people are doing? So, well, this comparison, the Z Flip 5 versus S23 Ultra, it's very straightforward. I'm basically trying to understand what most people can expect when they try to go for the Z Flip 5 instead of the S23 Ultra. I'm not saying it's a direct comparison, it really isn't. The differences are far too many, and if you like a folding phone, it's not like the S23 can fold in half, right? And the same goes for the Z Flip. It doesn't have nearly as much to offer as the S23 Ultra. Plain and simple, even in the cameras department. But what I want to know is whether or not the Z Flip can at least hold its own. I'm not expecting it to just beat the S23 Ultra straight up, that's impossible. But I want to see how well the main and the ultrawide camera can just hold out. And that's basically the whole point of this one. Now look, zoom, let's just get this one out of the way, because S23 Ultra is like better than 99% of the flagships out there, and it's obviously better than Z Flip. So this is the ultrawide shot, and it actually looks pretty good on both. And then we have the main camera, which again, it looks really nice. I don't really have anything to complain about. But then 3x, naturally the S23 will pull ahead. I wish Samsung would give us more contrast in the zoom shots, because you can see the contrast looks much better on the Z Flip, but obviously everything else looks better on the S23 because optical zoom. And same goes for 10x. I mean, it's a no-brainer, right? Like 10x optical zoom, there's nothing else that can beat it unless the phone I'm comparing it against also has 10x. So with that out of the way, now the real comparison begins, because at the end of the day, the main and the ultrawide camera, those are the two most important things, and those are the only two real cameras the Z Flip 5 has, except for the selfie camera up front, but that's pretty much useless. You probably know why. But anyways, the main cameras, see, the S23 has a very significant advantage in the hardware. It's a much larger sensor, much higher resolution, and we'll get to the resolution part, but this shot that I took, it was right after sunset, and it was fairly dark. Not dark enough for night mode, but something in between. And that's really where hardware advantages can kick in sometimes. And in this case, I mean, the shots look good on both, but if we crop into 500% like and just move to the darkest part of the image, which is this corner, and yeah, it seems as if there is slightly less noise on the S23 Ultra. It's 500% crop, so not exactly the biggest difference in the world. But on the flip side, well, no pun intended, but the Z Flip 5 here actually has more sharpness. Like the details look a touch sharp, just a pinch, not much. But that just goes to show you're not exactly losing out on much, at least in terms of the main cameras. Now that point is actually reinforced, because in this case, I just switched on one singular light. It was a bright light, indoors light of course, but still, it just gave them enough room to do their magic for both phones, and now both phones look essentially identical. I would say the S23 has maybe a touch more sharpness if we crop in all the way to 500%, but this is the thing, you're not getting like a ludicrous amount of detail from the S23 Ultra because it has a hardware advantage. The software is particularly well optimized on the Z Flip 5, even better than what the S23's optimization is like. And even in a super backlit shot like this one, it was really difficult, believe me. But both phones are basically identical. I guess the S23 has like a hair's width more contrast, but that's about it. The ultrawide camera, very similar story. Now this is a basic normal shot just for reference, I guess. I don't really know why I took it, I just wanted to. But anyways, it's a nice shot. Both of them look very nice, very detailed. And even in this backlit shot with the ultrawide camera, you know, I just keep saying the same thing over and over. The differences between these two in regular main camera and ultrawide shots, you're not really going to find any realistic difference. Especially in the ultrawide camera, it's like both of them produce almost identical shots. You're not going to see majority of a difference between these two phones. That's actually good news for those who want a Z Flip 5, I guess. And one little advantage on the Z Flip actually is that you can get in closer to the subject with the main camera, and only with the main camera. The S23 Ultra, for whatever reason, I don't know if it's got anything to do with the sensor or not, but whatever the case is, the Z Flip can get closer, as you can see in this case. But you cannot use macro with the Z Flip 5, which is, I think it's one of my bigger complaints that I have about the Z Flip. Like, I don't really care all that much about zoom. I mean, it would be nice to have a 2x zoom for portraits, but otherwise I don't really care much about it. So for me, the Z Flip's camera is good enough, and it would have been far better if it had a good macro mode, which the S23 Ultra has. I had expected it to have. I was kind of surprised when I saw that it didn't. Now, the 50 megapixel mode. That's a very good reason I'm not using the 200 megapixel mode, because it's just not worth it. You don't really see enough of a difference for the huge file size, the 4 times the resolution. You're not getting particularly more than what you get with the 50 megapixel mode on the S23 Ultra. Believe me when I say 50 megapixels is the way to go for the S23. It gives you supreme amount of detail, and the 200 is, I guess you could call it a gimmick. And if you crop in, yeah, obviously the S23 looks significantly better, and it has a lot of natural detail in there, while the Z Flip looks processed. There's a lot of grain, but you know, I gotta give it props. It looks very, very detailed. Like yes, it's sharpening things up. I can see the haloing, but still, I think it looks kinda nice, and especially for a 12 megapixel camera, it's definitely pushing the boundaries. Now for selfies. See, this is where I think the Z Flip 5 is possibly one of the best phones on the planet for selfies. And even for selfie videos, like everything put together. You obviously know why that is. Now this selfie I took with the selfie camera inside the Z Flip 5, and this is the only one I took with it. Because in my opinion, the selfie camera is completely pointless except for video calls. That's possibly the only time when you want to use the selfie camera and not the rear cameras. Because you can just fold it shut and you can take selfies like these. Now granted, the S23 Ultra's selfie game is peaked. Like, it looks incredible. There's very little that I've ever had to complain, but yeah, with the rear camera, the Z Flip 5 takes it. It has significantly more detail. I really dig the contrast that we're getting on the Z Flip 5. It definitely looks really nice, and just it's one of the most crisp and clean selfies that I've ever taken. Oh, and you can use the ultrawide camera. Need I say more? I mean, look, for anyone who is a massive fan of taking group selfies, well, this is a gem for you. This is the best thing you can buy. This really reminds me of the Mi 11 Ultra, if I'm remembering right. That thing had a rear display that you could use for using the rear cameras for your selfies, which is, I guess, is basically does the same thing. And every single advantage you have with the rear cameras, you get all of that for your selfies as well. This is precisely why I think it's the best selfie camera that you can get, except for smartphones that may have better rear cameras and can also fold in. Except for those smartphones in particular, I think the Z Flip 5 is possibly going to be the best. Same story for portrait selfies as well. I gotta admit once again, the S23 is keeping up quite well, but the detail preservation, the contrast and everything just looks so much better on the Z Flip that it's a no-brain win for me. I guess it's a shame for me because I don't really take selfies all that often, but the Z Flip is so bloody good at it, I might just start taking it. But then for night selfies, I think this is where things changed up a little, you could say. So the skin tones and even the details just look better on the S23 now. I don't know if it's an optimization problem on the Z Flip spot, but whatever the case, it appears as though the S23 pulls ahead at least in low light selfies. It's a very similar story when you try to take selfie portraits as well. It shows that it's taking night mode, but clearly the software is not optimized because the S23 looks perfect. I mean, that's the best possible outcome that I could have had given how little light I had in that scene. The Z Flip on the other hand, it's going crazy with the warmth. That's pretty obvious, right? And then of course for portraits. Now, I guess you already saw portraits with the rear cameras on the Z Flip 5, but regardless, the S23 Ultra is really good. I really like this slightly higher contrast that we get on the S23 Ultra as opposed to the Z Flip 5. But the biggest advantage that the S23 has is simply in the versatility. You can crop in to 3x, or rather you can zoom into 3x, and you can get a much better, much properly aligned portrait shot. Usually at 2x or 3x, you get no real distortion happening. It's pretty obvious here because the Z Flip is elongating me because it only has 1x zoom. And look, I wanted to go a little bit crazy. I may have gone a little too far with the backlit shot over here because both phones are struggling so hard on this. I would say it's a tie, and I would say both phones, technically they're doing as well as they could. Given the situation, there was almost no light on me. It should have been more of a silhouette shot. The fact that they can even resolve any detail, especially the S23 Ultra resolving as much detail as it does, yeah, it's quite something. Now, night portraits, you see, we had a similar problem in night selfies as well. The skin tones just look too pinkish, like that's a lot of magenta. Now granted, I had some warm light falling on my face. It was the only dim light that I had that I could switch on, and the S23 is kind of keeping a bit of that, but it also maintains really nice and accurate looking skin tones. Anyways, now let us move on to night mode. See, the thing about night mode for me is that I really like it when night shots have a metric ton of contrast and just really nice dark shadows and particularly dark skies. And the S23 just doesn't do it for me because of that very reason. Like, you can see the night sky looks really bright. I would say the Z Flip is doing a fairly good job. It's doing a better job than the S23. It's not perfect. If you really want perfect night shots, there's only one phone that I've ever used that gives you perfect night shots. It's the Xiaomi 13 Pro. I haven't used the Xiaomi 13 Ultra because it never showed up in India. It takes the best night shots that I've ever taken, and if you want to check out any of the camera comparisons, I've done them. I've compared it to the S23 Ultra, and it was very interesting. So links in the description. Now this one, I took it particularly for the night sky. I wanted to see if the Z Flip could at least resolve it properly, and it actually does a really good job. I think there's a bit more magenta in the Z Flip than you would want, but it is also slightly darker, slightly better contrast, and the overall warmth in the scene is better preserved on the Z Flip as opposed to the S23 Ultra. Just like with the daylight shots, you can't really have good zoom shots on the Z Flip, so that's something that you can't really use. And I gotta admit, the 3x looks particularly good on the S23 here. Not to mention this 10x. Now, I'll tell you this much, if you have a nice and small subject that's pretty far away from you, the 10x zoom can do a particularly good job. And I did have some street light falling on my subject, so that's a good thing. Usually you want some light to be there with 10x, but you can get some really interesting shots like these, and the Z Flip speaks for itself. Now then, for the ultrawide camera, well, both seem to be doing a fairly good job here. Although I do gotta let you guys know that the biggest weakness on the S23 Ultra is ultrawide night mode. It's the one thing from the day it launched I've been complaining about it, because it's like that one blotch on what could be otherwise a fantastic device with a near perfect camera. It's only losing out in terms of night photography because of the really low quality ultrawide sensor that it has. The software can only do so much, and in case of the Z Flip, you can see that there's a bit of smearing going on, and both of them basically suffer from the same issues. And it's pretty obvious in this case. There's smearing in some cases, and there's a lot of noise reduction going on. Like, I can just see it, especially right along the lens flares, which is also another issue. There's a ton of lens flare happening on both phones, and see, I expect this kind of a result from the Z Flip 5 because it doesn't have like a ton of focus on the cameras, so it's fine. I can live with this result on the Z Flip 5, but not on the S23 Ultra. The S23 needs to have a basically perfect camera system because it doesn't fold over. Now, just to really drive home my point over here, I took this shot and you can see the problem with the lens flaring. Like, it's significant on both phones, especially on the S23. Like, it is suffering right now. Samsung really needs to upgrade their ultrawide camera. Like, they have a good main camera, their 3x works well, the 10x is sublime. You really need that ultrawide camera to get a massive upgrade. But yeah, this one I took in ultra low light conditions, and by ultra I mean conditions in which I could barely see anything with my own damn eyes. So yeah, that's the photographs. I think they speak for themselves. These are really good. The S23 has a larger sensor and it can produce more detail, obviously, but the Z Flip isn't exactly far away. The only real complaint that I have is not with the details, but rather with the color tones. There's a little too much magenta happening on the Z Flip here. And then finally, of course, the moon. You can capture the moon on the S23 Ultra, and you cannot do that on the Z Flip 5 for obvious reasons. So that's where I for this comparison. And look, I'm gonna be completely honest here. I personally feel like the Z Flip has cameras that are almost deceiving in a way that they perform better than they appear on paper. Because when you look at it, it's basic two 12 megapixel cameras, main and ultra wide, and because of that, I guess, not just resolution, it's just the overall setup and the hardware. When you look at it, and you just immediately feel like the focus is obviously not on the cameras. So naturally, just like me, anyone would expect that the S23 Ultra would have won in every category, like a slam dunk win. That did not happen. Let me tell you, yes, the 3x and the 10x, that's obviously a hardware advantage that the S23 has. But setting that aside, the main and the ultrawide camera are pretty much up to par. There are obviously things that the S23 does slightly better, like the 50 megapixel mode. Naturally, that's really good on the S23. But for the most part, I didn't see any discernible difference to the point that I have to say, yes, if you really want good cameras, you have to buy the S23 Ultra. The real choice here is this. You have a folding or a flipping device that has a really good and very, very competent main and ultrawide camera, which can also be used as selfie cameras, by the way. So if you want good selfies and good selfie videos, the Z Flip 5 is the dream. I feel like even in my case, I was very much on the fence when it came to the Z Flip 5 because I just presumed the cameras would not be all that good, but they are. They most definitely are. So, hope you guys enjoyed, found this helpful, and I'll be seeing you guys sooner with many more to come. Cheers.